In these turbulent times, just about every solution you can think of has been put forth by someone, somewhere, as a way to calm the waters and live with more happiness and ease. But the fact is, you cannot think your way to better life. Change isn't something your mind can accomplish alone. It calls for mind and body to work together in a deeper unity than you may ever have imagined. Tonight, we'll learn how our cultural beliefs affect the diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment of disease. The difference between growing older, which we all do, and quote-unquote aging by our culture's standards, which we can learn not to do. What happens when we move, quote-unquote, beyond the pale of our tribe's expectations? How to navigate adversity using uncertainty as a guide? Tonight, we give you biocognitive tools for a healthy life. Join me in experiencing a paradigm shift in which the myths of doom are shattered by the science of hope. Survival takes a backseat to meaning, and fear gives way to love.
You are listening to VERITAS. If this is your first time, welcome home. To listen to tonight's full interview and all of our material, join the VERITAS family and click on the subscribe button at veritasradio.com. You can make your purchase with a credit card, PayPal, cash, check, money order, and even cryptocurrency. We are now accepting Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, and more. Don't forget to visit the VERITAS store for focused life force energy, MMS, rebounders, CBD pure hemp oil, pure organic sulfur, flash drives with all our Sanitas and VERITAS seasons, and other great products. And if you want to get in touch with Mel, want to be a guest on this radio program, have a guest suggestion, or have feedback, just click on the contact button of our website at veritasradio.com. And now, here's your host, Mel Hostelrick.
Dr. Mario Martinez is a clinical neuropsychologist who specializes in how cultural beliefs affect health and longevity. He proposes, based on credible research evidence, that longevity is learned and the causes of health are inherited. He has studied healthy centenarians, people 100 years or older, worldwide, and found that only 20 to 25% can be attributed to genetics. The rest is related to how they live and the cultural beliefs they share. He is the author of the best-selling book, The Mindbody Code: How to Change the Beliefs That Limit Your Health, Longevity, and Success, that teaches his theory and practice of biocognitive science to the general public. In addition to longevity, he also explains why our immune system is not just a protector. Instead, it responds to the cultural premises we learn to perceive the world. And directly from Nashville, Tennessee, I would like to welcome Dr. Mario Martinez. Hello, Mario. Welcome back. How are you?
Hi, Mel. It's doing well. Haven't talked to you in a while, but that's a pleasure.
It's been, I believe, 8 years. You were with me on Sanitas. We did a stellar interview, so if anybody wants to listen to that, I'm not going to repeat a lot of what we discussed there because there was a lot. But you have new material now. Basically, what you're discussing now is a lot of longevity. This time we're discussing the mind-body self, how longevity is culturally learned and the causes of health are inherited. How did you get into longevity, the blue zones, the telomeres, and all of this that fascinates us so much?
Started about 20 years ago. I wanted to find out what is a good theory of longevity, because what's happening with gerontology, the part of medicine that studies the aging process, is that they're looking at the illnesses of aging rather than the causes of health of growing older, which is what I do. And so I wanted to find out what works, and what works is centenarians, people who are 100 years or older and they're in good health. So I was looking at the healthy centenarians. And I found that, as others have found, Butner's and other, that genetics is only 20 to 25%, no more. The rest is how they view the world. It's not even diets, not socioeconomics. All those things help, but they don't really determine the longevity. And what I found was that there were 4 factors that we'll be discussing that actually are unique to these people. And I studied them all over the world, all 5 continents. And there, it's pretty unique. But then the most exciting part, which is what's new here from our last conversation, is that I'm working now with a world-class longevity center in Poland. They have offices in Poland and Germany, and they're doing biological markers that can identify of course, your chronological age is what you are. And then based on epigenetic markers, they can look at what your biological age is. So you can have chronological age and biological age, which is how your cells are aging. And that's more important than how old you are. But the interesting and exciting research that I'm doing is that I developed a questionnaire that identifies the 4 factors. So we could look at the 4 factors to see where you're high, where you're low, and then correlate that with your biological markers, with the usual things, for example, your cholesterol and things like that. But more than that is the inflammatory kinds of markers that actually determine your biological age. So we can look at that, but then the most exciting thing about it is that once we do that and we correlate, let's say you're high on one factor and you're low on another factor on the biological, then we can do interventions to actually reverse your biological age without medications or any kind of. Sometimes we use supplement is basically the way, what we call in neuroscience, the default mode, which is the goggles that you use to look at the world. So that's the most exciting thing that we're doing. And this will be world class. No one's ever done this before.
What is the reaction of the medical industry to this type of research?
Well, for the most part, it's good because this is hard data. This is when you find that that correlations that you have, for example, with anti-inflammatories that you have in your body, and it correlates to people. For example, let's say you're 70 and your biological age is 50. It's basically determined by how your glycan and other kinds of markers are actually functioning, and then you correlate it, and you might find, for example, all right, this is correlated with people who are 50, not people who are 70. So you might be 70 chronologically, but biologically, the way that you're aging, which is the inflammation, is really what you need to look at. You're 50. So it's real data that determines how you're aging based on how the cell biology, how your cells are aging. So for the most part, it's taken very well because these are scientists. These are people that are well-trained scientists who are doing this work. And we're testing it with different countries and different groups of people, and find that it's a very powerful way to look at it. But the most exciting thing about it is that you can actually reverse the way that the cells are aging.
This is so fascinating because even the fact that when somebody says, well, I know it's impolite, but when people say, how old are you? And you immediately think of your age, are we communicating that to ourselves, to program ourselves? I remember years ago when people used to live maybe to 65, then 75, now it's 82. It's almost like we're being told, we're telling our body to just live to a certain age. Do we have to lie to ourselves and say, my chronological age is this, but I feel 35?
There's no question about that. I don't even tell my age, and it's very important that you don't. I've talked to many times to Christiane Northrup, who's a good friend, and when they ask her age, she'll say, Mario doesn't want me to tell my age, so I'm not going to tell anybody. And the reason for it is that we create, here I'm going to talk psychoneuroimmunology, we create portals, cultural portals, that tell you how you should behave, how you should live, how you should dress, and sometimes even how you get sick. And these portals are infancy, childhood, adolescent, young adult, and especially middle age, and then senior or older. And those portals are a perception that we learn culturally. And that perception is too powerful for you to fight by intellectually saying, no, I'm feeling better, I'm feeling my age. So the best thing to do is you don't tell your age. How old are you? That's not interesting to me. Do you have problems telling your age? No, you have problems wanting to know my age. So what it does then is it gets you out of that concern, because you lose either way. Somebody says, oh, you're looking really young for your age, which means that you shouldn't. Or, oh, you're looking older. Or see, it pegs you psychoneuroimmunologically into a particular age. So, for example, if you are in a culture that says that middle age is 45, you're going into your mind and your body and your biology is already preparing itself to 45. Okay, this is what happens at 45. A day before 45, you're not middle-aged. But when you reach 45, then you're middle-aged. Then the culture will admonish you to live within that. You wear something that's not middle-aged and say, what, are you trying to look like a teenager? What are you doing? You want to go back to school? No, you got to save for your retirement. And admonishing you to stay within that portal. In that portal, then your biology will respond to it. Examples, your biology will respond to your culture beliefs. So, for example, I lived in Uruguay for a while, and there, women with menopause, when they have the hot flashes, they call them bochorno, which means shame. And shame, we know now, psychoimmunologically, causes inflammation. So the women there, they call it, even the doctors will call it shame, even though they know it's hormonal. They'll say that she's having the symptoms of shame instead of calling it what it is. So
really,
in those countries,
they call it bochorno down there as a shame.
Bochorno, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, bochorno in Argentina and Uruguay, but here they call it the curse. So it's not any better. So then women in those countries have more symptoms. They have more hormonal problems. Their libido drops, their self-esteem drops, and they get frumpy and they begin to look that way. And you figure, well, it's middle age. It's got to be, or it's got to be the hormonal process and your menstruation and all that, and the loss of menstruation, all the reductionistic things that are real but not sufficient. You go to Japan, and they call it konenki, which means the second spring or the second opportunity. Women don't have those problems. Their self-esteem goes up, their libido goes up, and they become models for other women in the sense of wisdom. Totally cultural.
Fascinating. Doesn't shame trigger inflammation?
Yes, of course. Shame, but look how cultural it is. The Asian cultures are more collectivist. Our cultures are more individualist. If you shame someone and they accept it as shame, that person has been put down, it's been shown already many times that you begin to secrete molecules of inflammation, like tumor necrosis factor and interleukins and things that cause inflammation. And my theory states that the brain and the immune system, because the immune system have to understand the brain, are cultural. They're bioinformationally cultural. So if I shame you, you will have inflammation. And I've worked with many, many women with inflammatory kinds of illnesses, autoimmune, fibromyalgia, and rheumatoid arthritis. And every single time, there have been few exceptions, they have some kind of a shaming wound, some kind of archetypal wound that I call shame. So what they're doing is they're constantly secreting inflammatory molecules, which to some point confuses the immune system, and there's some indication that it pushes it into autoimmune kinds of problems. So there's no question about it. But if you're in this culture and I say something to you, you're so stupid, you take it as a personal individual thing. But in Asia and Asian countries, it's very collectivist. It's if you shame the family, or if you shame the group, or if you shame the country, that's when the inflammation then begins to kick in.
Not only are they collectivists, I mean, throughout Asia, but in Japan in particular, but their saving face philosophy is so ingrained that if you tell the truth but offend someone, the courts rule in their favor in a defamation lawsuit. Even if you're right, honor and saving face are crucial to the Japanese culture.
Yes, very much, very much. And then that's cultural, and you learn the cultural beliefs. And why is this? People will talk about the mind and body, that they communicate with each other, but nobody tells you why or how that happens. So as you know, in my work, it's really a combination of neuroscience, cultural anthropology, psychoneuroimmunology. So you have to go to anthropology to understand this. So as Homo sapiens, the modern humans, we're about 150,000 years old. And about maybe 40,000 years, we developed consciousness and language. Consciousness anthropology will tell you started when we started burying our dead. and not burying our dead only for sanitary reasons. The dead were buried with trinkets and things that were considered to be valuable. Also, at that time, language comes on, and you start using trinkets that have no longer a functional need as a tool. That requires a tremendous neuropsychological abstractive ability and a language that comes. So then, before the language, you had grunts, and you had really a lot of epigenetic qualities of your senses. You could smell a lion 300 feet away. But then language comes on, and your brain is used to smelling the lion and to secreting the cortisol and the norepinephrine and all that because it's an alarm. Then language comes on, and you can say, there's a lion 300 feet. The brain had to understand that as being something beyond the senses, and the immune system had to respond to that. And this is why language is bioinformational. And this is when you say things, you're saying bioinformational things. They're not empty words because of the transition of when we develop consciousness and language.
I don't mean to talk about somebody else's work for a second, but I just remember Margaret Mead's quote. You probably know it. Years ago, anthropologist Margaret Mead was asked by a student what she considered to be the first sign of civilization in a culture. And the student expected Mead to talk about fish hooks or clay pots or grinding stones. But no, Mead said that the first sign of civilization in an ancient culture was a femur, a thigh bone, that had been broken and then healed. Mead explained that in the animal kingdom, if you break your leg, you die. You cannot run from danger, get to the river for a drink, or hunt for food. You are meat for prowling beasts. No animal survives a broken leg long enough for the bone to heal. A broken femur that has healed is evidence that someone has taken time to stay with the one who fell, has bound up the wound, has carried the person to safety, and has tended the person through recovery, helping someone else through difficulties where civilization starts. So, Mario, we are at our best when we serve others. This is what makes us civilized.
No, of course, and that's what consciousness. Because before consciousness, there was no present, past, and future. We take it for granted, but there was no past and future. Actually, this is going to sound a little politically incorrect, but I had a very gentlemanly professor of anthropology, and he spoke very softly, and he wore a three-piece suit, but he was very to the point. He said, before consciousness, and you saw something in front of you, you only had two choices: do I eat it or do I fornicate it? That's it. That's as far as you can go. Now we have options because consciousness is there. But yes, true. Service is extremely important. Service has been looked at lately. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because Aristotle, 2,300 years ago, said that the hedonic life was not enough, that the life of pleasure for pleasure was not enough, that we needed what he called eudaimonia, which is eu is good in Greek, and daimonia is spirit, so good spirit. And he said that the good life required meaning in the joy and service that you provided. So you have to have meaning, joy, and service and purpose. So, okay, that sounds really good and everything. And but what is the science behind it? Well, lately, there's been some work done, which is very specific to the immune system. It's called CTRA. These are in the immune system, these are responses that you have against adversity. Cells that are about 21 to 40, CTRA means conserve transcriptional response to adversity. And these cells, these genes in the cells, will then trigger inflammation, antiviral, and antibodies. Okay, so that's really, or anti-inflammation, depending on that's really good for adversity. So what they did is they checked people, they did psychological tests to see who are more hedonic and more eudaimonic. And then they measured the CTRAs of both groups. The people that were more eudaimonic, which is to your point of the service, had better CTRA, which means they have better response to adversity than the people who were hedonic. So Aristotle was right. But the interesting thing is that when they measured the level of happiness on both sides, both were the same, but the immune system and the brain could tell the difference.
This is all interesting because it seems that inflammation, we demonize inflammation a lot. And I say this because when somebody's playing a sport and they hurt themselves, they immediately bring the ice to reduce the inflammation. But isn't the body telling us, leave me alone, I'm doing my thing, I'm just creating, giving heat to this area to transport more, the white blood cells, the blood flow, et cetera. Or somebody has a fever. I know if you go up above 104, you need to do something about it. But what do people do? They take anti-fever or fever-lowering medication. Why is it that we do the opposite of what our body wants sometimes?
Well, part of it is to relieve pain and to relieve the response. But here, if you have an inflammation because you broke your leg or because you have some kind of a pathogen, then that's an acceptable inflammation.
Right.
But these inflammations are biosymbolic inflammations. These are inflammations caused by the way that we think, because the immune system can't tell the difference. If you say you're stupid, it's the same as if you have an infection. But when they say you're stupid, you don't have an infection. So it shoots out all these molecular responses of inflammation, and they don't know where to go. And that's what begins to cause then illnesses and problems, because it's not functional. It's something as dysfunctional, but it's the same as if it were an actual pathogen or an actual breaking of tissue. And that's the amazing thing about it, at least to me it is.
So if you're producing molecules of inflammation, like if you had a pathogen, wouldn't the opposite be true? If I tell you, oh, you're a handsome man, or you're a beautiful woman, or you're a smart person, a wonderful human being, doesn't that create or produce endorphins and oxytocin?
Well, yes. And that's one of the things that I was going to talk about. But specifically, I call them archetypal wounds, as you know from my work. And there are three ways that a culture can hurt you. And one is abandonment. The other one is shame. And the third is betrayal. They have different psychoneurological responses. The most studied has been the shame. And I have worked clinically using the honor consciousness as an anti-inflammatory. And we're going to be testing that in Poland now. Clinically, I've been able to show it, but we're going to look and see how it affects the inflammatory molecules to see if they have. I believe that honor has an anti-inflammatory quality, and I've seen it with my patients when I work with fibromyalgia and other kinds of problems. So yes, that's true. And the four emotions that I use in the research that we're doing are generosity, gratitude, admiration, and curiosity. If you have those three or those four, you're going to have some incredible psychoneurological responses. And that's getting to your point. Gratitude, when you experience gratitude, you're experiencing oxytocin, as you said, which is a bonding neuropeptide. When you have admiration without envy, you secrete dopamine and endorphins, which are natural kinds of curiosity and good feeling type of emotions. With gratitude and generosity, the same. Curiosity, dopamine. So you're secreting in those four dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, GABA, all kinds of things that are powerful. So the immune system is set up for you to be a good guy, to put it simple. But this is how you kill it. If you have gratitude and generosity, which are very similar, you can kill it by a quid pro quo. You give me this, I give you that. I give you this, you give me that, done. You can kill the admiration and the dopamine if you have admiration with envy. And if you have curiosity with fear, you can kill also the curiosity, dopamine and so forth. So look how it kills it and look how it enhances it.
You said something interesting about goodness. Are we predisposed to goodness?
I think so. And I think Hoffman has done some work on that. He calls it precursors of empathy. Very early children, infants, number one, they hear crying and they cry. And the thinking was, what Hoffman thought, well, there might be imitation. So they recorded another child crying and the infant didn't cry. They recorded the infant's own crying and the infant didn't cry. So he calls it the precursors of empathy. The other studies also show very early, very young infants, a video of toys cooperating with each other and toys fighting each other. And consistently, they will spend the infants will spend more time looking at the cooperative behavior than the destructive behavior. So they're precursors there of goodness, but then the culture and the conditions that happen in life can kill it or enhance it.
Are you saying that everyone is born a certain way and it is the environment? And this is part of epigenetics. I mean, if you have your great-grandfather who died at the age of 50 of liver cirrhosis of the liver, and then the son followed the same tracks and became an alcoholic and again, but then the great-grandson decided, I'm not going to drink. All of a sudden lasted to be 85, 90 years old, and he broke the so-called curse. Isn't that proof?
Well, yes. Well, the epigenetics is basically, and to your audience, I'll explain it very simply, because it's quite a complex process. But Einstein said, if you can't explain something simple, you don't know what you're talking about. So I'm going to try. Epigenetics. Before epigenetics, it was thought that all traits and all the how we are comes from our genetics. It's a DNA expression, and that's fixed. Then 50, 60 years ago, epigenetics comes around and begins to look at environmental kinds of things affecting your expression of genes. And it's in the methylation. It has to do in the chromosomes and the way you don't change the DNA sequence. What you change is the gene expression. So without getting real technical, what's happening is that whatever you learn, it's passed on. But what's passed on is the propensity, not the sentence, not the genetic certainty. It's a propensity to be expressed based on your behavior and your beliefs and your environment and your culture. So, for example, people who are, I treated a kid who was a great grandson of somebody who was in Auschwitz, and this has been shown that they have a higher level of cortisol than other people because the epigenetic transfer for alert, fight or flight is there, but that can be changed, as you said. So the good news is that it's very pliable. Just like the brain is very pliable, epigenetics is very pliable.
Cortisol, isn't that something that creates so much inflammation, a stress response? But you said something interesting too. I'm just listening to some of your words and the language that you use, and it just catches my attention. You use the word portals, and I wonder, we live in a society, behind the scenes, those behind the scenes can catch our attention with mostly two emotional approaches, or maybe portals: ego or fear. If you don't buy this or that, you're not good enough. Or if you don't do this or that, something bad is going to happen. So we're getting alarmed constantly. Are those two considered portals too?
Well, they're more what in psychology you call affordances or demand characteristics, an environment that has certain demand characteristics to your portal. And the portal is you in your different developmental levels of childhood and adolescence and so forth. So, for example, looking at the effect of the environment, the demand characteristics is called in psychology. You can have a group. One group, they tell them, look, we're going to give you this pill, and this pill will speed up your heart. And then they go into a room, and don't worry about it. And there's a nurse there with a white uniform, a syringe in her hand. Don't worry about it, because if you pass out, we can bring you back. That's demand characteristics. They give them a pill, and it's just placebo. Another group, they give them the same pill, and they say, look, this pill is going to make you a little sleepy, but if you fall asleep, there's some couches over there, and the light is low, the couches are comfortable. Demand characteristics. The people who are expected to have the cortisol reaction, high blood pressure, the tachycardia, all kinds of things. Some of them do pass out. The others, half of them fall asleep. Totally demand characteristics. So that's what marketing is all about. They hire people who know what they're doing, and then you're a pawn.
Well, it was the father of modern propaganda, Edward Bernays, who basically said that propaganda and the media, they're the biggest tool to sell a product or keep people in constant state of fear. So those two things, fear and ego. How do
Yes.
we curtail that? Do we have to identify them first? In other words, if we're having dinner at 6 o'clock at night, shouldn't we just turn off the news? Otherwise, we're going to have digestive problems.
That's one way to teach gastrointestinal and reflux problems. You watch the news and you're eating, and that's what you're doing. Why? Because we have a sympathetic and a parasympathetic system. The sympathetic system is like what we're doing now, which is activating everything except digestion. But the parasympathetic is deactivating everything and activating digestion. So if the first thing is saliva, it's the first or the smell of food, that begins to go into parasympathetic to allow you to digest. But if you're watching the news and there's a rape or there's a bomb, or the brain doesn't know the difference. So you're going from sympathetic to parasympathetic, and that's how you develop gastrointestinal problems. And I work with a lot of Fortune 100 executives, and many of them have gastrointestinal problems and reflux and hypertension and things like that, because the sympathetic system is made for one thing and the parasympathetic is made for another. And that's one thing the centenarians do. Centenarians, when they eat, they eat. They have conversations, and that is one of the causes of health. Breaking bread with yourself and people that you love is one of the causes of health. And so that, obviously, that's what happens. So people that wake up and the first thing they do is they go to their cell phone, their cortisol level is going to be higher for the rest of the day. So that's how we're teaching ourselves to get sick.
Before we started the interview, we just started talking about some of the people that I had the privilege to interview, and they're your friends, Dr. Ellen Langer, Dr. Gabor Mate, and I'm thinking of Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, who passed away unexpectedly a few years ago, who had tremendous focus on the sympathetic or the parasympathetic nervous systems, and it depends on where your dominance is. You should base your diet on that. Have you heard that?
Yes, I have. But I think it's very important to not. I think it has a lot of value, but it's very important to not make it a universal, because context is everything. So you have to adjust to a context. We do have propensities, no question. That's personalities and so forth. But these are just propensities that can be modified. But what you want to look at is, what is the environment asking me to do, and do I want to do it? Agency comes in. Do I want to do this? The environment's asking me this. An example, a centenarian will go to the doctor, and the doctor will say, you have to take this and this and this, and he'll say, or she'll say, what is this for? Well, this is this, and it may cause this and that. And he'll say, I'll take this and I'll take this. And if anything happens, don't worry, I'm not going to sue you. So I asked one of the centenarians what happened, and I'm not promoting this because I think medicine has a lot to offer. But I asked him, so what do your doctors have to say? And he very innocently said, I don't know, they're all dead.
That is true. That is true. I mean, the average lifespan of the medical doctor is not as high. So if you're somebody over the age of 100, are you really going to be listening to them, or are you going to be listening to yourself, your instinct, your body? And I wonder if those centenarians really look at their age. Are they really concerned about the chronological age that they have, or they don't pay attention to it?
No, because one of the factors, or the four factors, and I'll start with that one, has to do with your perception of time. Their perception of time is they have all the time in the world. I talked to one of them. I use these examples because they're just so fascinating. And he had a little vegetable garden. And I said, that's a really nice vegetable garden. It's very impressive. He said, well, it's nice now. Wait till you see it in 3 years. And he was 102. So you project time and space. Another fallacy of gerontology is that they say as you grow older, you're going to feel like time is passing faster than and it's true for the wrong reason. People will say time is flying now, and they'll say, well, it's the brain, and is the brain shrinking, or is this? It's none of that. It's a lack of curiosity. What happens is that they call it the first 30s. Up to about 30, you have a lot of first. Your first marriage, your first sex, your first heartbreak, your first graduation. After 30, you have less and less and less. If you don't keep your curiosity up, then what happens is that when curiosity is up, you feel like you have all the time in the world. When curiosity is down, you think that time is flying. And here's how it works. It's very paradoxical. If you're doing something that you like, it's going to feel like it's passing fast. But if you think about it later, you're going to think that it passed slower than it actually did. If you're bored about something, when you're being bored, you feel like it's taking forever.
Yeah.
But when they ask you later how it was, you underestimate the time. And the reason for that is that the brain pays attention to things that are novel. But then when you have to think about it, you think that it happened a lot longer because the brain had to pay attention to a lot of things. So it elongates the perception of time. So centenarians have all the time in the world because they go from 30 and they stay at the high level of curiosity. They have a very high level of curiosity. So their time-space perception is very, very high on the factor of time that I measure.
Are they essentially not programming themselves to die? In other words, say you're a Greek person in Crete right now, just having coffee with your friends in the morning every single day, and they take their walks and they don't break their social meetings for anyone. That's what they want to do. That's what they want to do. But do you think by having that lifestyle of relaxation and walking, I think you need to have some motion. I'm not talking about weightlifting and going to the gym 6 days a week, but at least have some motion. How relevant is that to their longevity?
Oh, extremely, because motion consolidates a behavior. You have to have motion to consolidate a behavior. You have to have social connections. You have to have rituals. Ritual is another one of the causes of health, to have rituals. Not routines, but rituals that have meaning, cultural meaning for you. And every centenarian that I've talked to has some kind of ritual. I asked one, I went to Cuba to study on centenarians, and I asked this woman who was 100 or 101, I said, I didn't say rituals, I use more like ethnographic so I don't bias it. I said, what are the things that you do that have meaning for you, that you do on a regular basis, that you enjoy, and that give you a sense of identity? It's another way of saying what's your ritual. So, oh yeah, I have a shot of rum before I go to sleep every night. I asked another man, oh yeah, I have a cigar when I wake up, but they don't abuse any of that. I asked, how many cigars do you have? Just one. Why? Because that's all I need to enjoy. I don't need any more. The woman, how many shots of rum? One. Why? Because that's what makes me feel good. So they don't do it out of fear. It's just a ritual has a lot of quality, a lot of implicit quality and meaning that doesn't require any kind of abuse. You abuse what you need. You don't abuse what you love.
Ritual.
So
it's not the alcohol, it's not the cigar, but it's the looking forward to that ritual every single day. Is that what keeps them alive? They're looking forward to something?
Looking forward, but also enjoying the moment. Because at first I thought, oh, it's got to be the Cuban rum. So I'm going to look into the Cuban rum and the qualities. Or it's got to be the Cuban cigars. But then I went somewhere else and something else. So the ritual in itself, the value that it has is that you have an identity with something. You look forward to it, as you said, but you're experiencing it in such a complete here and now mindful way that it has all kinds of psychoneurological value that doesn't hurt you. Now, people, for example, people that are eating well and their tofus and their yoga and they do it out of fear, it doesn't help them. You have to do things out of joy, out of a ritual, not I got to do it because I want to stay healthy. That doesn't work.
Are you saying that there's some people who go to the gym because they avoid dying because they need to remain healthy? That's why I'm going to the gym. Or I need to practice yoga because I want to live longer. Instead of saying, I want to do this because I enjoy it?
That's right, yeah. Because there's several components. One is a fear component. If you don't go, you're afraid. But also you're doing it, there's no joy. You're doing it because you're protecting yourself against it. That's a ritual, a routine. When I work out, I work out 5 days a week, but I don't do anything that I don't like in the workouts. I find machines, I find things that I really enjoy. And if I don't like it, I don't use it. I use something else so that it becomes a ritual of joy rather than I got to go to the gym or I got to work out. That doesn't work. It'll keep you fit. I mean, you look good, but you're not going to look good inside.
Now, let me ask you this. We live in a world of hyper alarm. And we were discussing this with the fear and the ego, because that part is also, I believe, is creating inflammation. When you turn on the TV and you see, or social media, which is so pervasive now, especially for our children, their self-esteem, the amount of suicides. And I don't want to get negative, but I have to be realistic. Yeah, when you're looking at the filters that they have on social media, and all these girls look at themselves like, I'll never look like that. that creates inflammation, that creates sickness. How can we overturn this?
It's a slow process because people have to learn first the damage that it's doing, but also the problem with it is though that peer pressure has a lot of power, and it's not just peer pressure with adolescent. Peer pressure at every level of every age, you have peer pressure, and that peer pressure is a way of saying if you don't comply with groupthink, there's something wrong with you, or we're going to exclude you from our world. So you have to learn. And the whole thing that I do is you have to go inward and find out who you are. You have to ask yourself 3 questions. Who am I? What am I doing here? And who cares? And you have to ask those questions. And of course, who am I is not one me, but the me that I can always go to find the serenity. What am I doing here? Am I just here to work and then go to a nursing home? Or am I being here for some kind of service or something in addition? And who cares is very important. You have to have people that you can count on. The longest longevity study that has been done at Harvard, for over 75 years, they found that the main factor to keep people healthy, in addition to everything else, is to have one person in your life that you can count on. That's it.
One person in your life that you can count on. Isn't that proof that one of the biggest tortures that can be inflicted on a human being is isolation? And the fact that you think, I can always go to one person, gives you an incentive to live to many people?
Yes, but also, see, you're bringing up some very synchronistic here because you're bringing up the next topic that I want to talk about. The Greeks were very good at sentencing people. If you were a citizen of Athens, they wouldn't kill you. They would banish you. And you would go to what they called the prison of nostalgia. And people would die in the prison of nostalgia. So if you don't have the connection, if you don't have the people and you're banished from the group, animals, when they're banished from the group, they die. Aristotle died a year later after he was banished from Athens. So it's a very important thing. And the prison of nostalgia that they call it is, I'm missing my friend, or I'm missing this, I'm missing that. Relationships, unrequited love. Many people get sick because they don't know how to deal with the concept of. I was reading something that they were saying that this article that nostalgia is really good. Nostalgia is not that good for you. Ellen Langer does some work with that, and so have I. Nostalgia is going back to what never will be again. You have to live in the present, and you have to live on what you can change in your life, agency, not nostalgia. Nostalgia is not good for you.
But what about the people who, for example, my family left communism, and I always heard them talk about, in the 50s, this is how it was, blah, blah, blah. And you could tell that they would change. Or the person who's in his 90s or 80s and he's in a retirement home doesn't speak. You probably have seen the experiment. And all of a sudden they asked him what musicians he liked in the 40s and the 50s. And they put headphones. All of a sudden, the person lit up, opened his eyes, started singing, and the caretakers couldn't believe it. They said, I haven't heard this person utter a word in a single month. All of a sudden, he's just moving his hand. And so is nostalgia really bad? Or can you transport yourself just like Dr. Ellen Langer with that experiment that they brought the people into the 1950s with newspapers and TV and the whole little city around them. And after 1 week only, they measured the physical aspects and the mental aspects, and they actually regressed in time. Some stopped using their reading glasses. Some developed more muscle. How do you explain that?
Well, because the other group explains it. The other group was asked to live in a place where, in the present time, to reminisce about the future, about the past. And the difference is that you have to live as if you are in that place, not talking about it. So what she did is with that group, she had everything looking, as you said, from the 50s, and you had to talk about the 50s. So you were living
I see.
The memories rather than reminiscing in the prison of nostalgia. The others were talking about, and they actually got worse, and they didn't change very much. So, and getting back to the person with the dementia, dementia usually affects new memory and so forth, and you remember old things, but then, excuse me, you don't have the opportunity to live as if with the old things. So when you bring the old things, you're actually living the old things. You're living the music, so it brings you back into a place. So it's a really good question, but the difference is that it has to be the as if component of it, that you have to live it.
I see.
Rather than going back to the nostalgia of this is what I had, but I don't have it anymore.
There you go. The sense of loss. The sense of loss. I've read a lot about Finland. I think Finland was the second highest suicide country in the world, and it was during World War II. They suffered so much. They suffered incredibly then. And even right now, they frown upon anybody who, there's no such thing as PTSD. People don't talk about their problems. They have pent up problems. Things are getting better, but that's how it used to be. So I think is what you said. They were probably nostalgic about what they lost if they have to be relocated from parts of Russia into Finland. So is this why they have the sense of loss with nostalgia as opposed to reliving the good times?
Yes, that's the agency, the as-if agency. Hans Fehinger talked about that. He was a philosopher, mathematician, and he came up with a model of as-if because he said that we really can't grasp all of reality. We put out heuristics and we put out premises of what reality is, and we live as if that's what it is, and that's what counts. But if you then no longer living a reality in your memories and in your and things that are no longer going to be there, and there's nothing you can do about it, then that could be a problem. Another reason is that when you go to the hospices, when people go there to die, you talk to the nurses and you ask them, or at least I ask them, so who are the people that are having the peaceful death and the very traumatic deaths? And they tell me that the people that have lived a life that they felt that it was full, with not a lot of regrets because they did something about the regrets, they had a very very peaceful death. The ones who were in a lot of unfinished business, a lot of regrets, those were the ones who actually had the terrible deaths. And what can we do about it? Anytime that you regret anything that you did, what can I do about it now? That kills the potential to be harmful for you. So the fear of death, that's another thing about the fear of death, is really the accumulation of regrets. The less regrets, the less you fear your death, because you're living your life fully rather than regretting your life.
I spoke with a nurse years ago, a hospice nurse, and she did, contrary to Butner and Butner and the Blue Zones, she did it with people who were dying. She wanted to just see what regrets they had. And most of them said the same thing. I work too much. I spend less time with my family. You know, if we learn from all these people, just like we could learn from all these centenarians, why can't we learn from those lessons and apply it to us who still have a chance to live a long life?
Because there's a lot of pressure to distract yourself from the present. A lot of pressure to distract yourself from the present. How many people meditate? And by the way, if you meditate and you don't change your default mode, you'll go right back into it. People meditate and they feel really good, and an hour later they're back. The default mode is what needs to change, not the meditation. Could be just a Band-Aid if it's not done right.
Explain that. What do you mean by default mode?
Default mode is the way that we, excuse me, the brain has what's called a default mode, which means that when everything settles, that is how you view the world. That's the goggles. So if you, for example, are meditating and you feel really good and you're in tune with yourself and all that, that's fine. But if your default mode doesn't change from the world is dangerous, you're going to go back to that default mode, and within an hour, you're going to be back into your high level of stress. So meditation can help, but you have to change the way that you perceive the world. And those are the 4 factors that I talked about, or I talk about with centenarians. So the 4 factors are, first, the time perception, how you perceive time. The second is self-love, which something that cultures don't like. They teach you pseudo humbleness. The third factor is your perception of your health and your wellness. And the fourth factor is your aging components. So you're taught pseudo humbleness. You're taught, a little girl goes to her mom and says, "Mommy, look how pretty I look." She says, "No, darling, you don't say you're pretty. You let other people tell you. And then when they tell you, then you deny it. Pseudo-humbleness and confusion. Centenarians are not that way. I interviewed a woman who was 102 and she was very attractive. And I said, you're really very attractive. She said, oh, yeah, I've always been attractive. Ever since I was a little girl, I was attractive. There's no pseudo-humbleness there.
No pseudo-humbleness. So some people are being told to be humble, don't be bashful. Be bashful as a sign of strength. But and I'm not talking about being arrogant, but the person, as you said, 102, and she feels like, oh yeah, I've always been attractive.
That's frowned upon because you're taught it's a pseudo-humbleness, because if you say you look good and you think you look good, you want to say, oh yeah, thank you. But anybody, that's a really great job. Oh no, that's not that. When I do workshops and somebody will say, oh, that was brilliant what you just did. I said, yes, you're right, it was brilliant. But you know why it was brilliant? Because you can see brilliance only if you're brilliant. So we're co-authoring brilliance here. Mm-hmm. And that's what it should be.
Let's talk about archetypal wounds. That's a very interesting concept. Shame. You say shame causes inflammation. We discussed that. What is the connection between emotion and disease? Say fibromyalgia, or maybe even multiple sclerosis. Do you think there's an emotion-disease connection here?
I think, yes. I think there's an emotion. There's no question there's some genetic predisposition and environment, all that. But epigenetically, and you never should blame yourself. Epigenetically, sometimes we set up the environment to express illness or to express the causes of health without knowing it. And inflammation seems to be very important, very strong component in almost every illness, from cancer to depression. So inflammation is one of the most important things that you need to look into in your life, inflammation. And as you said, the shame, I'll go through all three of them so you can see what the audience can see what I'm talking about. Inflammation is basically hot. It's a hot emotion. You notice when people were shamed, they turn red. They're not cold, they're red. And that is the histamines and the inflammation coming out as if you're having some kind of pathogen out there. So the emotion is an emotion of shame that feels like you want the earth to swallow you. You want to diminish yourself. You notice people bring their shoulders down to shrink. Where pride, you bring it out and you bring your chest out. And the psychoneurology of it is, as I said, the inflammation, more than actually the stress hormones. Inflammation more than the stress hormones. Abandonment is cold. It's a cold emotion, and you have constriction of your cardiovascular system, and it's a constriction which causes coldness. And the feeling is a very strong sense of isolation, a very strong sense of aloneness, as you were saying, and it's cold. The third one, which is betrayal, and this is the hardest one to deal with because you question always love, you question the tricking. Betrayal is hot. And the emotion, it's always anger. You can ask a child, hey, look, I'll give you this little toy if you do a dance for me. They do the dance and you don't give them a toy, you trick them. That's a betrayal. They get angry. They don't get ashamed, or they don't get abandoned. But here's the interesting thing. You have constriction on both sides. When you have constriction with fear, you have that abandonment, the cold constriction. When you have constriction with anger, you have hotness. So look at the difference, how you can constrict, and psychoimmunologically coming from different emotions.
Can we equate stress with sprinting? Now, let me explain. In other words, we sprint as a survival mechanism to escape, say, from danger. We're wired that way, but we are not designed to sprint the whole day, which would be the equivalent of chronic stress. Stress is a biological and psychological response experience on, encountering a threat that we feel we don't have the resources to deal with. And when I say responses, I mean alarm, resistance, exhaustion. I think understanding these different responses and how to relate to each other may help us cope with stress. But what happens to us, Mario, if that response lingers long term?
Well, let me use an example. Sprinters and marathon runners. You look at marathon runners, and many of them look like they just came out of a concentration camp. They're not very healthy,
right?
Because it's a constant peak performance, and the heart doesn't like that. Sprinters, when used properly, they just sprint and they stop. They're muscular, they're strong, they have better cardiovascular. So what you want to do is you don't want to be a sprinter all the time, and you don't want to be a marathoner all the time. The sprinting is for short term. Burst training is one of the best ways to do cardiovascular training, better than aerobics. And a burst training is you can walk, you can run, you could whatever. You do it for 90 seconds, as fast as you can, and then you slow down for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. In those resting periods, you begin to secrete human growth hormone, which repairs, increases your muscle mass, great for the cardiovascular system. So everything has its place, as the idea is, I guess, the answer to what you were asking.
Is stress a response or stimulus?
What was that?
Is stress a response or stimulus?
Well, stress is a response, and the stress is totally interpretive. There are very few things that are automatically reflex fear. For example, spiders and sometimes snakes, but everything is culturally contextualized. So, for example, you and I are talking now, and our context is we're doing an interview, and we're talking about mind-body science. A lion shows up behind you, and you're going to have a stress reaction. Is a lion a stressor? No. If I was talking about training a lion, you would say, "Oh, here's the lion, so we can train him." So stress is an interpretation of an event that in some cases, it has to be, if it's fear-based or whatever, it has to be functional, but it's an interpretation. Also, some scientists talk about, okay, there's some real stressors here: crowding, loud noises, and extreme cold. It depends. If you're a teenager and you go to a heavy metal concert, there's crowding and it's extreme loudness, no problems. If you're a Tibetan Lama, you can sleep out in the cold where other people would die, and they just shake off the snow and they get up and no problems. So it's very contextual. So stress is a contextual response with a lot of cultural types of interpretations and loading, a lot of cultural loading.
I don't know why I was visualizing a Tibetan monk inside of a heavy metal concert. That wouldn't happen.
No, I don't think so.
Is stress an emotion or a response?
Well, it's a response. Stress at the most basic level is really hormonal. You're having what's called the axis, the hypothalamus pituitary to hypothalamus pituitary adrenal. That's you get from the brain. You get a signal from the amygdala, which picks up on any kind of fear or any kind of things that's dangerous. It sends information to the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus releases. That's at that level. But then you have emotional interpretations of what's going on, and that adds to or decreases the axis depending on how you deal with it. So, for example, you're driving, and you're comfortable. You drive. Somebody gets in front of you, and you get all upset and you get angry, and you could actually say, "Okay, this is a signal that I want to be very careful with where I'm driving." You can get angry because righteous anger is another one of the causes of health, which means anger that's appropriate to a condition where your innocence or your goodwill has been affected. But then you let it go and you say, okay, now I'm going to use this signal as something to turn the good music on, do a little relaxation when I'm driving and being more careful. So this is a signal to be better. But what do most people do? Not only do they curse the person and they get angry, but they can't wait to get to work so they can tell their story and out-victimize each other. Look what happened to me. Oh, that's nothing. To yesterday. So what you're doing in all that time, cortisol takes a while. You get epinephrine and norepinephrine. When you put your hand into something hot, that's not cortisol. That's the adrenaline and the norepinephrine. It's a reflex. Cortisol takes a while to come out. So you're letting cortisol come in. 20 to 30 minutes, cortisol starts rising. So you can actually let that cortisol not express itself as much, or you can let it express because you can't wait to go to work and tell people what happened to you. That's how we can change these processes, by learning the physiology and the cultural components that we have about things.
We have to take a break so that you can clear your throat because we've been talking a lot. And when we come back, I want to discuss the importance of letting go. The letting go of hatred, regrets. It's like having a tenant living in your mind for free. You do it for self-preservation and liberation, and more than anything, to find peace within yourself. But I still want to talk about the anti-inflammation consciousness. I really want to dive into the centenarians. This is so fascinating. If you really wanted to get the secret to longevity, it's right there. Vivid examples of people. And I'm not anti-doctors, but would I rather talk to a doctor who has a lifespan much, much less than these individuals who have learned the secret to longevity? You know the answer. But how can people learn more about your work, your websites, your books, Mario?
My website is biocognitive.com, and my books at Amazon, The Mindbody Code and The Mindbody Self. But also, you can get over 200 videos free on YouTube, and the channel is Dr. Mario Martinez. I put videos up almost every 2 or 3 days, and all kinds of information available to where I discuss many of these concepts, and it keeps things moving and with my latest thinking.
Well, as we know, for the past 2+ years, we have lived under a lot of stress, a lot of fear, and I want to be able to help our audience get away from all of this. The media, everything that surrounds us, it's almost like this constant state of fear. It doesn't have to be that way. You want to be conscious about what's happening around you, yes, but you don't have to be in this state of constant stress and fear, which can only contribute to disease, stress, and less of a happy life. But a lot more when we come back with Dr. Mario Martinez. This is Michal Sarek, and you are listening to VERITAS. We'll be right back.
Thank you for listening to the first part of this important VERITAS interview. To listen to the rest, and all of our material, proceed to the members section, or join the VERITAS family by subscribing. Click on the subscribe button at veritasradio.com. You can make your purchase with a credit card, PayPal, cash, check, money order, and even cryptocurrency. We are now accepting Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum. Don't forget to visit the VERITAS store for Focus Life Force Energy, MMS, CBD Pure Hemp Oil, Pure Organic Sulfur, flash drives with all our Sanitas and VERITAS seasons, and other great products. And if you're listening on YouTube, like, subscribe, and share it. And click the bell to be notified when new interviews are available. Now, proceed to the members section or subscribe to listen to the rest of the interview. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for listening to VERITAS. Because you don't want to believe. You want to know.